Hello everybody, I am Deepika from LearnoHub, a free learning platform where you can study physics, chemistry, maths, biology absolutely for free only at learnohub.com. So students, now we are going to start with our next chapter, that is the nervous system. So we spoke about circulatory system, we spoke about excretory system, and now is the time to understand our nervous system, our brain, our spinal cord. So let's start with the next chapter. So we as a human being, we are very well aware about what is happening around us. So there are few things like our heart is beating, so we are very well aware that our heart is beating, right? So there are many things that happen around us, that happen with us, and we are aware of it. So as if you see a lion, right, so immediately you will start running, right? So we are aware what is there around us and how we have to react to that particular thing, correct? So the question first that arises is, what helps us to understand all these things? So there are two systems, one is the nervous system and one is the hormonal system. So nervous system we are going to talk about in this chapter, hormonal system we will discuss in the next chapter. So nervous system and hormonal system, they tell us what is happening around us, how that will be dealt, and even the hormonal system helps us to coordinate the activities inside our body which we are not aware, but all those activities, they are occurring timely and in a coordinated way. We are eating food, our food is getting digested, it is getting absorbed. From that absorbed food, it is sent to all the parts of the body. Now the energy is being drawn by all the cells using those nutrients, right? So that is what is happening inside our body. You are just aware that you have eaten food, right? Rest, how energy is being derived from that particular that food, you are not aware, but our body is very much aware. Now you have eaten food, so our body knows what is the next step and how we'll go through that, right? So everything in our body is done timely and in a coordinated way. So this all is done by nervous system and the hormonal system. So why do we need, if I ask you why do we need a nervous system, right? So what will you say? So there are few needs that our needs for which we need a nervous system. The first is information about the outside world. If we have eyes, as soon as, see, I am very scared of dogs, right? So there might be other people who might be scared of dogs, right? So as soon as I see a dog, I simply sometimes freeze, or I simply sometimes turn my way, right? I don't go that ways where I see a dog, right? So in that case, what is helping me to understand what is there in the outside world? So my eyes, from my eyes the signal is going to brain, and from brain, my brain is telling my muscles, my limbs, that you have to turn around and just go home, be safe, right? So awareness about our outside world, so that it is for that we need a nervous system. Then it enables us to remember, think and reason out the things. So why that happened, why it was not that cold during the winters, right? And why, if there is something happening around me, right? So say I was doing something and that was unsuccessful. I was making a roti, right? And while making a roti, I was not able to roll that properly. So why does that happen? Was the kneading not properly done? So all those things we try to reason out the things, right? We try to recall the things, we try to remember the things, we try to think of it, right? The next is control and harmonize all the voluntary muscular activities. So we try we always try to harmonize, we always try to control our voluntary actions. If I am holding if I want to go to the other room, right, and I need to study, so what will I do? I'll hold the book. So all those are the voluntary actions. I want to go there, I want to read the book there, right? So those are the voluntary actions. So our nervous system helps us in that. The next is regulate involuntary activities. So there are certain involuntary activities like my blood pressure is under control, my heart is beating, I am breathing. So all those comes under involuntary activities which are not under my conscious effort, right? So I am not putting any effort to let my heart beat or to breathe. I am talking continuously but still I am breathing. So this is an involuntary activity that I am doing. So in this particular case, also our nervous system takes the control, right? So that is why we need our nervous system. So I hope this is clear. So neurons or the nerve cells. So neurons are a structural and functional unit of our nervous system. So recall the excretory system, nephrons. So nephrons were the structural and functional unit of kidney, right, which perform the function of filtration in the same way. So that was nephron, right? So I'll write over here. So that were nephrons, and these are neurons, which we also call as nerve cell, right? So these are the units of the nervous system. Now while talking about the unit of the nervous system, so this nervous system consists of brain, right? Our brain comes under our nervous system, our spinal cord comes under our nervous system, and there are many receptors which sense the things and which sends the information to our brain, right? So there are 5 sense organs, right? So eyes, ears, tongue, nose and skin. So these are the 5 sense organs, and throughout our body we have receptors which tell our brain what is happening. Now then coming on to the next one, nerves. So these nerves are very important because these nerve cells are present throughout our body and they help our body to communicate with the brain. Okay, so these make up nervous system. So let us now talk about the structure of neuron or the nerve cell, the structure of nerve cell in detail, because this structure is very, very important and many a times this question is being asked in your exams. So the first part of this neuron is the cell body. So can you see this structure, this amoeboid structure? So this structure is called as cell body, right? And there are certain extensions, right? See these branches. So these are called as dendrites. The next one is the long thread like structure, and this is called as axon. Okay, so these are the 3 main parts of our neuron. Okay, so let us now discuss each of them in detail. The first part of the neuron is cell body. Cell body is also called as cyton or perikaryon. So the word peri stands for surroundings, karyon stands for nucleus. So this is a structure where there is nucleus and nucleus is surrounded. There is a well-defined nucleus and this well-defined nucleus is surrounded by this cytoplasm which has granules in it. So it is called as a granular cytoplasm. So all the cell organelles are present, right? So this particular cell body or the cyton has all the cell organelles. Only centrosome is absent, and centrosome is a very important cell organelle which helps in cell division. Now since the centrosome is absent, so these cells, they have lost their ability to divide, right? So this is the structure of cell body. The next part of neuron is dendrites. So can you see these tree-like structures, these branches? So these are called as dendrites, right? So dendron, the word dendron means a tree or a branch. So these are the branched cytoplasmic projections of the body, right? So these are the branched cytoplasmic projections, and they conduct nerve impulse to the cyton. So their function is to conduct the nerve impulse. So basically they collect the nerve impulse from the surrounding and then they send it to the central part, that is called as cyton. The next part of the neuron is axon. So this long thread-like structure, is the neuron. So the long process from the cell body is the axon, right? So its size, it actually varies from few millimeters to even more than 1 meter. So its size is variable in the neurons. The next one that we see around this is this covering, right? So this covering is the white insulating sheath that is called as myelin sheath, which covers the outermost thin sheath, which is called as neurolemma or neurilemma, right? So neurolemma or neurilemma. So let us start from the top. So this structure is called as cyton or the perikaryon. So inside there is nucleus, and these branched structures are called as dendrites, right? After this, these small granules which are present inside the cytoplasm of the cell body, they are called as Nissl granules, right? So the cytoplasm is granular, so those granules are Nissl granules, right? Then there is this long process which is called as axon, right? So this is called as axon. So axon have these coverings, right? So it also has nucleus. It has this outer covering called neurilemma or neurolemma. Inside this neurilemma is the myelin sheath, and these bends in this sheath, they are called as nodes of Renwier, right? So these are the nodes of Renwier. So these are basically the extra cells which are covering the axon or the nerve fiber, right? So all these four things, they make up what? So they make up axon. So inside there is a thin thread-like structure. So outside this thread-like structure is this myelin sheath. Covering the myelin sheath is neurilemma, and also in between them is the nucleus that is present. Okay. Now coming on to the next, that is the myelin sheath, which we have already discussed, right? So it is the covering around the axon, and it covers the axon throughout, but there are certain gaps in this myelin sheath, and those gaps are called as node of Renwier, right? Then the end portion of axon, so this is the axon, so these are the terminal parts, right? So they have the swollen bulb like structures. So if you see them, they are something like this. You will see these bulb like structures at the end of the axon, and these bulb like structures store some chemicals which are called as neurotransmitters. So they have chemicals called neurotransmitters, right? These nerve terminals, these axon terminals, they are placed closely near the next dendron. So there is, just a rough imagination, right? So if this is one neuron, the end, these are the terminals of the axon or the neuron, right, which contains neurotransmitters. So they are closely placed with the other neuron, which are very close to them, but they are never attached to one another. There is a small gap between these two neurons, and which is called as synapses, right, or which is called as synaptic cleft, right? So the gap between the two neurons is called as synaptic cleft. Coming on to the basic terminology. So there is a term called as stimulus. So something that stimulates, something that that is the cause of an action, right? So it is an agent or a sudden change in external or internal environment that results in a change in the organism or its body part. So like if there is a lot of dust around me, right? If I go out and it's very windy and there is a lot of dust in the air, so what will happen? My eyes are going to close, right? I'll tend to close my eyes. So this dust around me is a stimulus, right? So it has changed, it has brought some change inside me. The next is response. So change in an organism resulting in stimulus, resulting due to stimulus. So whatever change comes in an organism due to this stimulus is called as what? It is called as response. The next is impulse. Impulse is the wave of irritability. Right, so it is basically an electrical disturbance that sweeps over the nerve cells. The next is receptors. So receptors, so there are certain specialized cells, the epithelial cells, which receive the stimulus, which receives this change around us, and finally set up a wave impulse towards our central nervous system. So there are various receptors in our body, right, like the phonoreceptors, right? I am writing in short, phonoreceptors. So phone, so what do we do with the phone? So we hear, right? So it is for the sound. In the same way, there are photoreceptors. Photo means light, so these are the receptors of light. So there are thermoreceptors, so these are for heat, right? So there are different kinds of receptors that are present in our body. Now the next comes is effectors. So effectors are the muscles, or they are the glands which on receiving the impulse from the brain or spinal cord, they contract or they secrete some substances. So they basically, whenever we receive a stimulus, we receive a signal, right? So there are the cells which work related to that stimulus, right? So they cause an effect, right? So those are called as the effectors. So those are the muscles, or they are the glands. Like when there is a lot of glucose in our body, so our brain asks, our pituitary gland asks another gland to secrete insulin so that glucose levels can be brought down. So these are the effectors. These are the muscles or glands that work against a stimulus or work as per the stimulus, right? So I hope this basic terminology is clear. So let us talk about the transmission of this nerve impulse. So when we talk about the transmission of the nerve impulse, so this is a nerve, right? So outside, the outer side, so this is the outer side, right? And this one is the inner side, right? So this is the outer and this one is the inner. So the outer side of a neuron or this nerve fiber is positively charged. Why? Because there are excess of N positive ions, the sodium ion, Na positive, not N positive but Na, that is sodium ions are present outside the membrane. So now this state is called as a polarized state. So this is in a resting stage, in a normal stage. So the nerve cell or the neuron is positively charged from outside and negatively charged from inside, right? Now when this particular neuron will get a stimulus, right? So stimulus, any kind of, say, heat, right? So in that case, what will happen? This membrane will become permeable to sodium ions, and now the sodium ions will enter into the neuron. Now the inside, not the complete neuron, but the portion of a neuron will become positively charged from inside and negatively charged from outside. Fine. So I hope this much is clear. Now this state is called as excited state, and this is also called as depolarization. So polarization state is when the outer side of the neuron is positively charged and the inner side is negatively charged. Correct? So I hope this much is clear. Then what happens? So this particular side is in the resting stage, but this portion, the brown portion, is now in excited stage. Now when this is in excited stage, this will send stimulus to the next portion of the neuron. So the nerve impulse is sent to the next portion, right? So now what will happen? This portion will also become permeable to sodium ions, and hence what will happen, this portion, the next portion will become will be in the excited stage, and it will become depolarized, and in turn the previous portion from where this nerve impulse had started and from where this stimulus has been given to the next part, so that region will again become polarized. So this region will be a recovery region and it will become repolarized. And now talking about this, so this again, this is in a resting stage. So this is in a this is a resting region, right? So I hope this is clear. So this is how this nerve impulse keep on transferring from one part of the nerve cell to the next part, and this is how the polarization, depolarization and repolarization happens, right? So first, polarization in the normal state, in the resting stage, when the outside is positively charged and inside is negatively charged, and depolarization happens when a stimulus is being stimulus is received by the nerve cell, right? So this is how the nerve impulse travels inside a neuron, right? Because when we talk about a neuron, so inside a neuron, inside a single nerve cell, the transmission of the impulse takes place in electrical form. It always takes place in electrical form, right? And when we talk about the transmission of nerve impulse between the two neurons, right, so that space is called as synaptic cleft. So in that portion, the transfer of the impulse takes place in chemical form. Okay, now the next is synapse. So the next topic is synapse. So synapse is what? It is basically that gap between the two neurons. See, this is one neuron, right? And this is so this is the next neuron, right? So there will be a gap, a microscopic gap between them, which is called as synapse, right? So syn, from the word synapse, syn means together or fused, right? And apse, so apse means a gap or a window. So it has taken from this, so the word means together there is a gap, right? So they are together but still there is a gap or there is a window between them. The next is there is a point of contact between the terminal branches of axons. So this is the this is one neuron, right? And this is the next neuron. So between the two neurons there is a gap. There is a gap between these two neurons. So that gap is called as synapse. Now what happens? This is one neuron, right? So this is the this is the first neuron. Okay, so this is the first neuron. So this is the axon. These are the terminal ends of this axon. Next is this neuron. So between them is a gap. At the end, at the tips, at these bulb-like structures of the axon, these axon endings or the nerve endings, they release a chemical called as neurotransmitter, right? So they release a chemical which is called as neurotransmitter, or which the actual name of this chemical is acetylcholine, right? So it is called as acetylcholine, right? So this acetylcholine as soon as the nerve impulse reaches the nerve endings, it converts this electrical signal into a chemical signal, into the acetylcholine. So acetylcholine will be released in the gap between the two neurons, right? And this acetylcholine will give a signal to the next neuron, and that impulse will be passed to the next neuron. And as soon as the impulse has been passed to the next neuron, there will be an enzyme which will degrade this chemical so that this particular neuron gets ready for the next nerve impulse, right? So this the chemical has to be broken down so that next nerve impulse can pass, right? So this is a very quick thing, right? So if we talk about the transmission of the nerve impulse. So it is around 100 meters per second. So the nerve impulse travels 100 meters per second. So it is very quick, it is very fast. So very quickly this chemical has to be degraded. Okay, so I hope this is clear. So the synapse and how the chemicals or how the signals or how the impulse is passed from one neuron to another is clear to you. Types of neurons. So there are 3 types of neuron. The first one is sensory neuron, right? The second one is motor neuron, and the third one is association neuron. So as their name, it is very clear. Sensory neurons, those neurons which are present in the sense organs, and they sense something and they send this signal to our central nervous system, right? So they are the sensory neurons. Then there are motor neurons. So as soon as our central nervous system receives this signal, the central nervous system sends a message to the effector cells, the effector muscles, which has to respond to that particular stimulus. So they are called as motor neurons, right? So this is clear. Now association neurons. So there are certain neurons which are present in central nervous system and the spinal cords, and they are actually helping these sensory and motor neurons to get associated with each other to transfer the impulse. So those are called as association neurons. Okay, so I hope the types of neurons are clear to you. The next is nerves. So there are many nerves that are present in our body. So nerves are, if you see this, so there is a just think about a underground wiring, right? So you have seen that they put a big cylinder like of a thing, right? So open from 2 sides but closed from all the other sides, right? So it is a cylinder kind of a thing. So just think about that, and then these electricians, they put many wires in through those cylinder like things, right? That underground wiring is done, right? So there are many wires that are present, okay, and all of them, they are insulated so that the signals or the electricity does not pass from one wire to the another. So same is the case over here. So this is a tubular sheath, and inside this tubular sheath there are a bundle of nerve fibers or axons of the separate neurons, right? So different neurons, and they are different these nerve fibers, right? Their separate axons are present. They are enclosed in the tubular sheath. Now these nerves, they are thread like white structures which emerge from brain, which emerge from spinal cord, and then they spread throughout our body. All of them, they are covered with a myelin sheath, because this myelin sheath act like an insulation and prevent the mixing of impulses or signals to the adjacent neurons. So now there are so many neurons that are present side by side, right? Now they need to be insulated so that some other some other signal does not come, right? So this axon will carry its own signal, this will carry its own impulse, this will carry its own impulse. So they are insulated so that their impulses do not get mixed with each other. Now the kinds of nerves. So nerves are what? So they are a bundle of nerve fibers, right? So there are different kinds of nerves. So one is sensory nerve, second is motor nerve, and the third one is mixed nerve. So sensory nerves, those nerves which arise from, so they arise from sense organs, and then they merge into what? Then they take this impulse to the brain, right? For example, optic nerve arise from eye and ending in the brain. So like the optic eyes, so this eyes are the sense organs, so there are optic nerves which arise in our eyes, and they send this signal to brain. So basically they arise from eyes and they end in brain. right? The next one is motor nerve. So those nerves which arise from brain or the spinal cord and then they end up in the effector cells. So the signal is sent by sensory nerves to our brain. Now our brain will send a signal through these motor nerves to our effector organs. So there is a lot of dust. Close your eyes so that that dust does not come into your eyes, right? So that signal is sent by brain to the effector, to the motor nerves of our eyes. So for example, nerves arising from brain and supplying muscles of eyeballs for rotating the eyeballs, right? So this signal is sent to the effector muscles. Next is mixed nerve. So those nerves which contains sensory as well as the motor nerves. So the best example for this is the spinal nerves. So spinal nerves are the mixed nerve which contains sensory as well as the motor nerves. Then one more term that we talk about in nervous system is ganglia. So the singular is ganglion. So this is the aggregate of the cyton or the cell bodies, right? So those structure which has a well defined nucleus and a granular cytoplasm, right? So it is an aggregate of these cytons or cell bodies of nerve cells from which nerve fibers arise and they enter into, right? So the nerve fibers arise from them and the nerve fibers enter into this cyton. So the aggregate of all these cytons is called as ganglions or the ganglia. Now coming on to the next topic, that is two major divisions of nervous system. So what are the two major divisions of nervous system? So they are central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. The central nervous system is composed of brain and spinal cord, and talking about peripheral nervous system, so it contains all the nerves that are arising from or going into the central nervous system and the spinal cord, right? So all the nerves, so all the wherever we are talking about all the nerves, so they are in the peripheral nervous system. So this peripheral nervous system is again subdivided into two. First one is somatic nervous system and the another one is autonomic nervous system, right? So somatic nervous system, so it deals with the nerves which conveys information to skeleton muscles, or skeletal muscles are what? So they are the voluntary muscles. So they convey the so they convey this information to the voluntary muscles. Then coming on to the autonomic system, so it is composed of ganglia and the nerves which are related to involuntary muscles. So whatever the involuntary functions, they are connected to the internal organs. So all of them, all those nerves, they come under autonomic nervous system. Autonomic, so just think of about automatic, right? So there are certain functions in our body which are happening automatically, so they are involuntary. So these are the nerves which are connected to these involuntary muscles, right? So I hope the difference is clear. Let us talk about the very important part of our body, that is brain. So human brain, if you compare the brain of all the animals, so human brain is largest among all. Okay, now the brain is a very delicate organ and it is well protected inside our brain box, or which is called as cranium of skull. So inside the cranium of skull or inside the brain box, so this delicate part of our body is present, right? So the weight of an adult brain is 1.35 kgs and it constitutes 2% of our body weight. So whatever is your body weight, right? The 2% of your body weight is just your brain. Okay, so find out what is your brain weight. Okay, so whatever is your body weight, so find out what is the 2% of your weight. So that will be your brain, the weight of your brain. The next is water. 80% of our brain constitutes water. So whoever says तुम्हारे दिमाग में तो कचरा भरा है, no, our brain is full of water. That is very important for our brain, right? So it is 80% of water and 25%, that is 1/4 of the total oxygen taken into the body. So whatever oxygen we breathe in, out of that 1/4 oxygen or the 25% of oxygen is used by our brain. It is taken by our brain. Okay, so I hope this basic information is clear. Now talking about the coverings. Now brain is a very delicate organ, so we need brain to be super safe, right? So there are coverings of the brain which are called as meninges, right? So the brain is protected by 3 membranous coverings which continue backward on the spinal cord. So they start from here and they continue backward and they cover spinal cord too, right? So they are dura mater, arachnoid, pia mater. Right, so the dura mater, so it is the outer tough membranous fibrous membrane. Then arachnoid, it is a thin delicate middle layer giving web like cushion. Okay, then pia mater, it is the innermost highly vascular membrane which is richly supplied with blood vessels. So going from outside to inside, so it is dura mater, arachnoid and then pia mater, right? So the dura mater, it is very tough, it is very it is a fibrous membrane. Then the next one is arachnoid, which is a thin delicate middle layer which gives a web like appearance to this covering, right? Then next is pia mater, so it is the innermost part which is richly supplied with blood vessels. Okay, now if there is inflammation in the meninges or these coverings, so that is called as meningitis, right? So the inflammation in meninges is called as meningitis. Now the space between the covering membrane, all these coverings of the membrane, they are filled with a watery fluid which is called as CSF, that is cerebrospinal fluid. This cerebrospinal fluid acts like a cushion which protects brain from the shocks. So whenever we move our brain or if we fall, so our brain is protected because it has a fluid which acts like a cushion, and that fluid is CSF or the cerebrospinal fluid. Now talking about the main parts of the brain. Now brain is very important, so we have to look into the brain very carefully, right? So we need the details about the brain. So brain has 3 parts. One is cerebrum, then cerebellum and medulla oblongata. Right, so these are the 3 main parts of the brain, and now we will discuss each one of them and their functions in detail. So the first part is cerebrum. So cerebrum is the largest portion of the brain and it is divided into 2 equal halves. So these equal halves are called as cerebral hemispheres, right? So there is a left cerebral hemisphere and there is a right cerebral hemisphere. So the outer surface is highly convoluted with ridges and with grooves. So there are grooves, right? So you can see them. So these are the grooves and there are ridges. So you will see this kind of pattern, right? So these are called as grooves, which has somewhere there is flat, then there will be a hill like structure. So these are called ridges and grooves. The internal structure, if we talk about, so it is hollow. The cerebrum is hollow internally and the walls have 2 regions. The one is outer and the another one is internal. So the outer is called cortex and the inner region is called medulla. So the outer portion or the cortex, it has numerous cell bodies here. So there are many cell bodies of neurons, and being since there are numerous cell bodies, so it is grey in color and it is called as grey matter. Okay, so I hope this is clear. Now the folds which are present, these are the folds, right, which are present in the cerebral hemisphere. These are called as gyri, and there are grooves which are present. So these grooves are called as sulci. So what is the purpose of these grooves and folds? So they basically increase the surface area so that more nerve cells, more neurons can be accommodated into this portion. This is the largest portion, and this portion, the number of neurons can be increased, the number of the number of nerve cells can be increased by increasing the surface area of the cerebrum. So outside the outer portion, that is the cortex, is grey, that is the grey matter, and inside the inner portion is medulla, and this medulla consists of white matter which contains axons or the nerve fibers of neurons. And there is one more thing that is present, that is corpus callosum, right? So this is corpus callosum. It is basically a sheet of fibers which consists which contains or connecting two cerebral hemispheres. So we spoke about two cerebral hemisphere. So there is left and there is right? So these two cerebral hemispheres are connected to each other somewhere, and the portion, the sheet where they are connected, right? So that is called as corpus callosum. Now this all these parts of cerebrum are very important, and you must remember where are they present. When we were talking about the coverings, right? So see, there are three coverings, there are three meninges that are present. So the outer one is dura mater, then inside the middle one is called arachnoid, and the very inner one, the middle one is arachnoid, and the inner one is called as pia mater. So inside that, now there are two cerebral hemispheres, one is left and one is right. The left one has sorry, not the left one, but inside the cerebral hemisphere are many folds and many grooves which increase the surface area so that more neurons or more nerve cells can be accommodated in that particular area, right? So I hope the cerebrum is clear. Coming on to the functions of cerebrum. So cerebrum has a highly developed portion which is cortex, right? So which is filled with grey matter. It enables us to think, to reason out, to invent, to plan and to memorize things. So this, if we want to write the functions of cerebrum, so you will write, so it is a part, or it is a seat of intelligence of brain. So it is that part of the brain which manages our consciousness. So we always say, so it is there, it was there in my subconscious mind or the unconscious mind. So that subconscious mind and the unconscious mind is basically the cerebrum. Okay, so it also controls our willpower, and it also controls our voluntary actions. So whatever we do, so that we do by our will, right? So we want to do it, or I want to move my fingers, I want to run, I want to read. So all those things, they are controlled by the cerebrum. So subconscious and the unconscious mind is located in cerebrum, and also whenever a person is hypnotized or a person is asked to recall the things, so that particular time which part of the brain is functioning, so that is cerebrum. So cerebrum is that part of the brain which comes into the function. Okay, so I hope the functions of cerebrum are clear. The next part of the brain is cerebellum. So cerebellum is the little brain, right? So you must have heard people talking about chota dimag. So this is that chota dimag. Why it is called as chota dimag or the little brain? Because so you see this portion, the purple one, the blue one, right, and this green and this brown. So this is the larger part of the brain which we call as cerebrum, right? So this is the bigger part of the brain, the upper part of the brain, that is cerebrum. Now below that there is a small portion of the brain which is cerebellum. Okay, so this is basically that little part of the brain, that chota dimag, right? So as you can see, there were certain grooves, there were certain folds which were present in cerebrum. So inside this cerebellum there are no grooves, there are no folds. So basically there are no convolutions, but there are numerous furrows which are present. Now it has cortex. So cortex, the outer cortex has the gray matter. So this gray portion is the cortex region where gray matter is present, and the inner white portion has the white matter. And if you see this structure, it something looks like a tree. So don't you think it looks like a tree? So this is the stem and these are the several branches. So it basically looks like a tree. Okay, so this part is what? So this is cerebellum. Now it is very important to talk about the functions of cerebellum, right? The little brain. So the main function is to balance our body and coordinate our muscular activities. So just think, if you wanted to stand, right, and you wanted to walk. So that impulse, like you wanted to stand, right? So this is what you thought, you wanted to stand. So it is a conscious effort. So consciousness, which part of our brain takes care of this consciousness? So that is cerebrum, right? So that is cerebrum. Now cerebrum the impulse will start from cerebrum, that is the upper part of the brain. And how will you walk, how your when you start walking, how will you balance your body, and how the contraction and relaxation of muscles will take place while walking. So all of that will be under the control of cerebellum. So this is how the different parts of the brain, they coordinate the activities. This is how the different parts of the brain, they coordinate with each other and help us to do our day-to-day activities. So now we have come to the third part of our brain, so that is medulla oblongata. So this is the lowest portion of the brain. So we started with the cerebrum, so these colorful portions. Then we came to this tree-like structure, that is cerebellum, right? So cerebrum, cerebellum, and the final one, so this portion is medulla oblongata. So this is the lowest part of the brain, which is located at the base of the skull. So this is the skull and it is located at the base of the skull, right? So then it is roughly triangular, not exactly but roughly triangular, and it is continued after the medulla oblongata. So the next portion is spinal cord. So the function, it is very important to discuss the functions of the medulla oblongata. So it controls the activities of internal organs. So we just eat and we just forget, right? But there is some part of the brain which actually controls these activities, control the activities of the inner organ, the internal organs. So that portion is medulla oblongata, like the peristalsis. So you ate, then the chewing is conscious, right? So that conscious effort you made, okay, and then after that, once you swallow it, the peristaltic movement of the alimentary canal, so food will go into the esophagus. From esophagus it will go into the stomach. From stomach it will then go into the small intestine, then large intestine, and this is how it keeps on going, right? So this is controlled by medulla oblongata. Then movement of breathing, right? So you never think that you have to breathe, or do you think? I don't think. I am speaking continuously, but there is a portion of my brain, that is medulla oblongata. So that portion knows that I have to breathe, right? So I don't have to think. So that is an involuntary action. Then beating of heart. So I don't have to think continuously that, oh my God, did my heart beat or not? So it is beating. So my heart is doing its function, and the portion of the brain which is responsible for the beating of my heart is medulla oblongata. So if there is any injury in medulla oblongata, so it in many cases it leads to the death of a person. So it is very important. So this complete brain is very important, right? So if cerebrum is hurt or cerebrum is injured, so that consciousness, that willpower, all those things will get affected. right? So similarly, if the cerebellum is injured, so then your body balance. So have you seen an alcoholic person? So there is no their cerebrum basically gets affected with that alcohol, and finally there is no coordination between his two legs, his muscles and his tongue, what he is speaking, right? So the coordination between the muscles, it goes off, right? So and then next is the medulla oblongata. So if medulla oblongata is affected, so your complete heartbeat, your breathing, so everything will get affected. So it is very important for us to protect this important part of our body, that is brain. Now talking about the regions. So we spoke about the parts, right? So there are three parts: cerebellum, cerebellum and the medulla oblongata. Now there are three primary regions of our brain. The first is forebrain, then midbrain and then hindbrain. Forebrain, the cerebrum, right? The cerebrum, the biggest portion, the largest portion of our brain, and diencephalon. So these are the parts of our forebrain. Then comes the midbrain, and finally the hindbrain. So hindbrain, the cerebellum, pons, medulla oblongata. So all these three make up hindbrain, right? So let us now talk about these parts in detail, these regions in detail. So as we already spoke about cerebrum, so let us recall what we have studied. So the main function of the forebrain. So forebrain has two parts, right? So forebrain. So the first portion of forebrain is cerebrum. So cerebrum, so it is the seat of intelligence. It is that part of the brain which takes care of the consciousness, then the voluntary actions, then our willpower and our memory, right? So if somebody hypnotizes us, or if somebody asks us a question and that happened say 10 years back, right? So you actually try to recall the things. So that memory is stored in your cerebrum, but that gets imprinted with the new impressions. So you tend to forget the things that happened 10 years back, but the new things are very much fresh in your mind, right? So these are the different functions of cerebrum. The next portion of forebrain is diencephalon. So basically this diencephalon has two parts. It is subdivided into two parts. The first one is thalamus and the another one is hypothalamus, right? So thalamus. So thalamus is that part or that portion of our brain which relays the pain and pressure impulses which generated in cerebrum, and the hypothalamus. So hypothalamus is basically a gland. It is a gland which maintains our body temperature, and it also maintains this pituitary gland. So basically the secretions of pituitary gland are maintained by hypothalamus. So basically hypothalamus will tell pituitary gland to secrete a hormone so that the other glands can do their functions, right? So the thalamus and hypothalamus. Now the midbrain. So midbrain is that portion of the brain which is very small, which is a tubular part, and it reflexes, its function involve the reflexes which involve eyes and ears. So eyes and ears reflections are maintained by our midbrain. Now the last portion, the last region of our brain is hindbrain. So hindbrain, it is the brain which is at the back side, right? So cerebellum, pons and medulla oblongata. So the function of cerebrum, so as we already discussed, it coordinates the muscular activity, and it helps in the body balance, right? Pons. So pons carries impulses from one hemisphere of cerebellum to another. So from one hemisphere, right? So there are hemispheres, right? So pons help these two hemispheres to interact with each other, right? To carry impulses from one hemisphere to the another, and it also coordinates the muscular movement. So our muscular movements are coordinated by pons. The next one is medulla oblongata. So medulla oblongata controls activities of our internal organs, our beating of our heart and breathing, so all those things. So we have already discussed these functions about medulla oblongata. So this was all about for today. So we discussed about brain, we discussed about the parts of the brain, the regions of the brain, and the rest of the topics we will discuss in in our next video. So I hope these parts were clear, the functions were clear. So now just revise all of them and till we meet again. So as you all know, LearnoHub free है पर best है.